12,000 years ago, the Earth was struck by what many scientists believe was a comet. It approached the planet from the northwest, heading toward eastern North America. It split into two large pieces as it entered the Earth's atmosphere, and perhaps 1 million smaller fragments followed. The largest piece hit the mid-Atlantic Ocean, causing a massive tidal wave, and another large piece struck off Puerto Rico, creating a deep trench and more tidal waves. Fragments rained down in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, and at least 500,000 smaller pieces hit the entire east coast of America. The impact caused flash fires on the islands of the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, instantaneously burning all vegetation and killing virtually all life. But the worst destruction was yet to come. The impact of the comet fragments in the Atlantic Ocean caused massive tidal waves, and not long after the flash fires wreaked their total devastation, the entire region was drowned in a series of violent and massive tidal waves. The islands in the region had been burned and then swept clean by the catastrophe, and most traces of the region's history were erased. The disaster is known as the Carolina Bays event, and it may be the solution to one of the most intriguing mysteries of all time. For many people believe that this was the location of the center city of the island empire of Atlantis. Andrew Collins, author of the best-selling book Gateway to Atlantis, believes that the island empire of Atlantis was located on Cuba and the Bahama Islands, and he believes that Plato's description of Atlantis' destruction is a key to understanding its location.
Plato stated that it was destroyed in a major cataclysm, he says, involving earthquakes and floods, in around, well, he differs in his time, but any time between 9,500 BC and 8,500 BC. And we know that this is the exact time frame for what is now being referred to as a nuclear event, which devastated large parts of the Americas and other parts of the world. The heart of this event seems to be in the region of the eastern states of North America, because here we find as many as 100,000 craters, elliptical craters, in size no more than a few hundred meters, ranging up to around a few miles in length, all orientated northwest to southeast, and known as the Carolina Bays, after the first states in which they were found. And that from their distribution, it's quite clear that an awful lot more would have fallen in the Western Atlantic basin, and this would have disrupted the waters, never mind the actual base of the ocean itself, to such a degree that they would have made a complete mess of the Bahamas and the Caribbean, which is my favoured choice for the location of the island empire of Atlantis.
Surprisingly, Collins' idea about the location of Atlantis is similar to information gained from the readings of America's famous sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce. The transcripts of Cayce's readings, more than 14,000 of them, are stored at the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, Virginia. About 700 of Cayce's readings discussed Atlantis, and he placed at least one of the main islands of the empire in the Bahamas. But the most intriguing part of Cayce's story of Atlantis involves 3 identical Hall of Records established by Atlantean priests just before the final destruction. Author John Van Auken explains this amazing story.
When Edgar Cayce went into his unique, deep trance state and attuned to what he described as the Akashic records, And when he was asked specifically about the ancient Atlanteans, he actually mentioned that they created an actual collection of records that they stashed in 3 secret locations on the earth before the final destruction of Atlantis. When he was asked where these locations were, he said in Giza, Egypt, off the right front paw of the Sphinx. In Yucatan, buried in a location that is overshadowed by a temple, and off the islands of the Bahamas in some deep water that once was a temple that sank. He explained that 3 specific individuals were assigned with taking 32 stone tablets to these locations and stashing them in a secret chamber to be opened after the ages had passed and a new age was about to begin.
While many people have sought the Hall of Records in Egypt and the Bahamas, little effort has been made to find the Yucatan Hall of Records. But Cayce's story of Atlantis provides major clues to its location.
One of these key Atlantean priests that was assigned with taking a collection of the records and finding a secret place to hide them was a high priest that Cayce said was called Iltar. It's possible this Iltar is what we know today as Ixamna, the Mayan godlike being who sailed in a canoe and from the east and came into their territories and had powers that were unusual. According to Cayce, the initial place that Iltar stashed his readings and built a little temple around was ultimately destroyed as the final destruction of Atlantis occurred. Iltar then had to take his stash of records and go deeper inland and hide them a second time. And so he was the one leading that group. When Cayce was specifically asked who was with him, he said 10 other individuals. So we know there was a small group of Atlanteans. They were carrying the records that recorded the prehistory of Atlantis and other events that had occurred that we're not aware of, recorded on these tablets, and that Iltar hid them twice. The second time, we assume, was the final time.
Efforts to discover Cayce's 3 Hall of Records continue, but a recent focus of the ARE is to identify the location of the Yucatan Hall of Records. Myths about the Maya founder Ixamna are helpful in this quest. The idea that Iltar was Ixamna is echoed in Central American legends of the god Kukulkan. Kukulkan is said to have come from an island in the east, bringing knowledge and civilization to those already living in the region. Olmec carvings depicting Kukulkan typically show him as a feathered serpent traveling across water. In his hands, stone tablets are usually shown, but the exact location where Kukulkan placed his tablets is uncertain. In the book The Lost Hall of Records, Van Auken and Laura Little explain how a series of 1930s readings by Edgar Cayce helped researchers identify the location of the Yucatan Hall of Records.
The readings appear to be almost evasive and vague about the location of the Yucatan Hall of Records. However, a link between Piedras Negras, Guatemala, and Cayce's Yucatan Hall of Records was made for the first time by ARE researchers back in the 1930s. Those researchers had been following a series of readings that not only gave several clues, although a little bit vague clues, but clues about the location of the Yucatan Hall of Records. It also, most interestingly, gave information that indicated that an emblem of an Atlantean artifact had already been discovered in the 1930s in the Yucatan, and that portions of this Atlantean artifact had even been sent to museums in Pennsylvania, Chicago, and Washington. Cayce kept referring most frequently to the Pennsylvania Museum. And finally, someone asked the question, should they contact the leaders of the Yucatan expedition who were connected to either Pennsylvania State Museum or, and this is how they phrased the question, or the University of Pennsylvania, and tell them about this information and ask for their help in finding this artifact and the Hall of Records. And the answer that Cayce gave was yes.
It was December of 1933 when Cayce stated that altar stones had been uncovered in the past few months at the location of the Yucatan Hall of Records, and that the University of Pennsylvania Museum would receive some of them. The clues given in Cayce's readings clearly pointed to Piedras Negras as the location of the Yucatan Hall of Records. A 1972 booklet by Carolyn Hyatt details the efforts made in the 1930s. Piedras Negras lies on the Guatemala side of the Usumacinta River in the Yucatan region. In Cayce's era, it was a common practice to refer to the entire Maya area as Yucatan. Maps from the 1800s and early 1900s typically depict the entire peninsula area as Yucatan, and it's likely that Cayce was referring to the entire Maya region as Yucatan. The first archaeological expeditions to Piedras Negras were made by Teobert Mahler in the late 1800s. Mahler found some large structures there and made a crude and inaccurate map of the site because the ruins were so confusing. Between 1914 and 1931, researchers from the Carnegie Institute made 4 visits to Piedras Negras. In 1931, J. Alden Mason and Linton Satterthwaite of the University of Pennsylvania began excavating there until 1939. Some of their discoveries included fantastic artifacts, which many people believe are the finest sculpture ever produced in the Americas. Many of the artifacts recovered from Piedras Negras are in the Guatemala Archaeological Museum in Guatemala City. One of the first things we noticed was an official display showing the first people entering the Americas from the South Pacific, just as Cayce stated. Then, we were shown an unusual artifact that has been ignored in the archaeological literature. It was a small, 6-pointed star resembling a Star of David. But by far, the most impressive items in the entire museum are the incredible sculptures discovered at Piedras Negras. From the museum in Guatemala City, we began our expedition by flying to Tikal. The surrounding jungle is filled with amazing animals and is a mecca for bird watchers, but not all the jungle life is so pleasing. Everywhere in the Guatemalan jungle are the annoying howler monkeys. Their roar can be deafening. Tikal was undiscovered until a Guatemalan expedition found it in 1848. Until 1951, the massive site was accessible only by foot. The government built an airstrip near Tikal in 1951, and for 15 years the University of Pennsylvania excavated and restored the site, followed by continual excavations and restoration by the Guatemalan government. Despite 50 years of arduous work, only a small portion of the site's been restored, but the ruins accessible at Tikal today are among the most spectacular in the world. According to archaeological reports, Tikal became a city in about AD 250 and collapsed after its ruler was taken captive and sacrificed in AD 562. While Tikal is too recent in origin to be considered directly related to the Hall of Records and Piedras Negras, some of the pyramids at Tikal depict how structures at Piedras Negras appeared during Maya times. After the main construction of each structure was completed, the outer surface was covered with a smooth layer of plaster. Then, the plaster was brightly painted. The trip from Tikal to Piedras Negras began with a 5-hour ride across increasingly rugged roads. first part of the journey ended at Posada Maya, a small eco-lodge on the banks of the Usumacinta River near Bethel, Guatemala. The small lodge is situated in the midst of Maya ruins. From Posada Maya, Piedras Negras is reached only by taking a 6-hour boat ride. The Usumacinta River is rapid, deep, and is inhabited by crocodiles. The level of the water moves up and down quickly, and the huge boulders lining the riverbanks create numerous rapids and whirlpools. 6 hours is a long time to travel in a small boat, but the scenery was enthralling. Before we reached a set of rapids, we stopped for a moment where we were shown a spot where archaeologists believe that the ancient Maya devised a system to pull small boats through the rapids.
It's like rope making grooves into the limestone over years. They don't know when, but definitely it's used over lots of years. There's all kinds of grooves right here, right here, right here, right here, right here, and even over here and over here. And what Ron was saying is that it's not a good place for mooring because there's rocks right here, rapid little whirlpools. It's not really a good place for mooring, but it's a perfect alignment for lining the boats up the rapid.
As we approached the landing point at Piedras Negras, the Acropolis, now completely covered with jungle, came into view. The large tree on the top of the mountain marks the highest point of the Acropolis. A reconstruction by Tatiana Proskurikov shows how the Acropolis looked when it was inhabited, and the building outlined in red shows the area where the tall tree now stands. Recent archaeological reconstructions of Piedras Negras show the structures there as being smoothed with plaster and then painted bright red. When it was first seen by visitors traveling the river, the red appearance of the high and imposing Acropolis must have been incredible. The entrance to Piedras Negras is on a beach where one of the most impressive carvings still lies. The giant stone was dubbed the Sacrificial Rock by Mahler because he thought it might have been used for human sacrifice. The design shows two people sitting across from each other. One of them is holding out a book or a box-like object. In his readings on the Yucatan Hall of Records, Cayce described a sundial at the site, and this imposing carved stone may well have served that purpose. In addition, with its location right on the bank of the Usumacinta River, the stone seems to serve as a sort of signpost. Our base camp was about a mile from the river entrance into Piedras Negras. We stayed on the sandy beach in sight of rocks which sheltered crocodiles. After the second day, we had to drink river water, which was supposedly purified. During the long ride in the river to Piedras Negras, we'd seen some dead animals in the water, and at our camp, we watched a dead horse floating as our drinking water was being drawn from the river. Late one night, the Guatemalan boat captain tried to call a jaguar into camp. While they'd been successful on some previous attempts, we didn't see any evidence that it worked. We still aren't sure if the attempt to call the jaguar was a smart thing to do or not. Traveling by boat from the camp each morning, we accessed Piedras Negras from the river. From this spot, the entire complex is uphill. From here, the ceremonial portion of the site extends for a half-mile north and south and runs over a third of a mile from the river to the east. In recent years, archaeologists have found that the area surrounding the complex is nearly covered with ruins. When Mahler made his map in the late 1800s, he found only the most obvious structures. Not far from the river is a tomb called Burial Number 10, which was excavated by the University of Pennsylvania in 1933. Some paths cut through the main complexes at Piedras Negras, but walking through areas without the paths is difficult. Dense vegetation and giant ceiba trees are found everywhere in the area, and ruins appear to be under the thick mat of the decaying jungle floor. After visiting the burial site, we went to a partially restored building that served as a sweat bath. In the 1930s, archaeological reconstruction artist Tatiana Proskourakov was employed to render a drawing of how the structure appeared.
It's kind of like placed in a very delicate, secret place for them to maybe even come back for.
One of the pyramids at Piedras Negras that we suspected could have been related to Cayce's Hall of Records is called K5. It's located just to the east of the Acropolis. In 1933, Penn discovered a large stucco mask on the exterior of the pyramid and believed it to be so important that they remained at the site 10 extra days. Excavations revealed that the mask was probably only one of 8 that were on the front of the pyramid. As with pyramids at many other Maya sites, K5 was shown to have several earlier structures underneath it. Before we got to Piedras Negras, we thought that Pyramid K5 had a good possibility of meeting Cayce's clues about the Hall of Records. The pyramid, now in rubble, was undoubtedly an imposing structure when it was used, and it no doubt contains burials or chambers. Walking around the pyramid revealed a massive heap of ruins. It's unclear when the earliest structures underlying Pyramid K5 were actually constructed.
Brigham Young, in their most recent archaeological excavations, have found evidence for a settlement site that runs into what's called the pre-classic era, which may mean that the settlement is as old as 1000 BC. But that's the oldest that they have found so far. It's located primarily in the southern part of Piedras Negras near the river.
The area near the river is known as the South Group. It's a complex of pyramids and numerous other structures arranged around courts, plazas, and what appears to be a processional walkway from the river leading up to the Acropolis. Most of the structures of the South Group are completely overgrown, and few of them have had any excavations done, but significant astronomical alignments are present in the South Group pyramids.
There are 13 pyramids, and there are at least 5 in what's called the South Group, which is one of the oldest areas of the site. And we looked to see if there were any sightings that might connect to the grouping of Orion, which we know is important in Egypt through the work of Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert, their book Orion Mystery. What we found was that the belt of Orion rises over the top of one of the pyramids in the morning, right at the date August the 12th, 3114 BC, which is the Mayan creation date, the start of this era that we're currently involved in. And even more interesting, when we look at how the belt of Orion sets, it can be aligned by the same pyramids setting on the day that's considered the ending of the era, December the 12th, 2012.
The meaning of the Maya creation date of 3114 BC is slightly better understood today. On August 13, 3114 BC, Maya texts say that the first image of turtle was seen in a place called Lying Down Sky first three-stone place. The turtle was a Maya constellation, and Orion's belt was in the midst of the turtle's back. There are only 5 Maya monuments known to have the date 3114 BC inscribed on them. The broken round table, called Altar 1, was discovered by Mahler in the late 1800s in front of the Acropolis, directly in line with Pyramid K5. The pieces of the altar remain at Piedras Negras today. The top of the table-like altar depicts 2 seated figures, similar to the sacrificial stone at the river.
On this altar is the date that's considered to be the Mayan creation date, 3114 BC. This is the date of the current era, and the Mayans had calendars that had all kinds of cycles. Well, a particular cycle began 3114 BC, and it ends 2012 AD. Now, these cycles, some people believe that it might denote the end of the world, but actually this was a 4th cycle that the Mayans referred to, a 4th world or a 4th creation as they called it. So it's very likely that in 2012, rather than an ending of the world, it's an ending of an era.
Also at Piedras Negras is an unusual carving on the side of a cliff. The carving depicts the cosmic turtle and the maize god's emergence. It's apparently a reenactment of the sacred creation story. During their first 4 years of work at Piedras Negras, Brigham Young University unexpectedly discovered a massive dry cenote about a mile from the main site. Cenotes are formed by underground streams that cause the limestone surface to weaken and cave in, creating circular holes. The cenote at Piedras Negras is the largest and deepest known in the entire Maya world, but the walk to the cenote is all uphill. Alright, here we go again. Demonstrate the depth. Uh-oh. Holy cow! Oh my gosh. Tell them not to throw themselves over with it. We also entered several caves at Piedras Negras and saw many others. Most of these are shallow, but some of them were used for ancient burials. In his field notes from Penn's 1933 work in Piedras Negras, Linton Satterthwaite wrote that he had excavated 11 temples, 17 palaces, 2 ball courts, and several sweat houses during that single season alone. But in the 1930s, an excavation into a temple or pyramid sometimes meant digging a simple hole into the side of a structure or digging under an altar with a pickaxe. Some of the ruins at Piedras Negras still display the openings made by the 1933 field season. They reveal an amazing number of different construction layers. One focus of early archaeologists at Piedras Negras was on 5 large altars. Altar 1, which has the 3114 BC date inscribed on it, was found at the base of the Acropolis on the outside of a gigantic wide staircase. Altar 2, shaped like a jaguar paw, was on the other side of the staircase. Both of these remain at Piedras Negras. In his readings on the Yucatan Hall of Records, Cayce related that the stones which were being uncovered at the site were actually altars. Their presence at the base of the Acropolis may somehow point to the location of the Hall of Records. The most impressive structures at Piedras Negras are on the Acropolis. We had a strong feeling that if the Hall of Records was present at Piedras Negras, it had to somehow be linked to the Acropolis. The walk up the side of the Acropolis is steep and sometimes difficult. The entire area is covered with rubble and is an amazing and bewildering complex of gigantic walls, stone staircases, pyramids, and temples. When closely examined, areas that appear to be jungle are actually the jungle growth covering stone structures. In numerous places, huge trees have taken root and grown within thick stone walls. Over the years, the trees and other growth simply engulfs the structures. Some buildings on the Acropolis remain partially intact, and they show the incredible construction ability of the ancient Maya. Tatiana Proskurakov's 1930s rendering of the Acropolis is believed to be an accurate portrayal of what the Acropolis looked like at its height. She remained at Piedras Negras for many years and came to love the site so much that when she died in 1985, her ashes were buried at the highest spot on the Acropolis. Before going to Piedras Negras, we reviewed detailed modern maps of the site and compared different structures to Cayce's most interesting clues about the Hall of Records. For example, in a 1939 reading which mentioned all three Hall of Records, Cayce stated that the chambers containing the Yucatan Hall of Records were overshadowed by a temple. It could be argued that a chamber under any temple or pyramid is overshadowed by the structure above it, but that didn't appear to be what Cayce was saying. A literal interpretation of Cayce's description of a temple overshadowing the Hall of Records seemed to imply that a high temple cast a dominating shadow over the entrance to the chamber containing the records. Again and again, we were drawn to the Acropolis as the key to understanding what Cayce meant. The highest temple on the Acropolis is on the northeast edge of the mountaintop, and the north-facing backside of the Acropolis is usually shadowed from the sun. When Mahler made his map of Piedras Negras in the late 1800s, he showed no structures in that area. The area is steep, and it isn't known if Mahler simply focused his attention on the more obvious structures. More modern survey maps show several temples on the north side of the mountain, but one structure in particular shot out from the map at us. It's called J29 and was a multi-tiered temple that had been built into the base of the mountain at a spot where it fit into a curved crevice. The highest structure at the top of the Acropolis is almost due south of J29, and it would have definitely cast a shadow over J29. While we were at the Archaeological Museum, we spoke at length with a Guatemalan archaeologist who'd worked extensively at Piedras Negras and asked him about the structure. He replied that he had looked at the structure and agreed that it was highly likely that a tunnel system under the Acropolis could be accessed there. Our guides had never been to the area of J29, despite making many trips to Piedras Negras. In fact, they didn't really want to go there because the area is steep, has no paths, and is densely overgrown. But our Guatemalan helpers hacked our way into the area, and we took a long and difficult hike, walking on the steep and rugged base of the Acropolis. J29 had one small excavation done in modern times, and several caches and unusual artifacts were found. A clump of iron and numerous crystalline stones were recovered, but all these items were somehow lost. The excavation also revealed that J29 had been rebuilt several times. When we reached the ruins, it was clear that newer structures had been built over older structures many times. Removing a few outer stones revealed that the older construction seemed to be superior. I found a curious stone with a hole drilled through it, and in the rubble, large numbers of high-quality limestone blocks were seen. Exactly what I'd envisioned. A building that would have collapsed. With another building on it. As I viewed J29, my feeling was certain. If the Hall of Records is at Piedras Negras, this was where it could be accessed. But one more surprise awaited us. While oppressive heat and increasing dehydration began to take its toll on me, we visited Pyramid O13, which is the dominating feature in the East Group. O13 is built into the side of a curving hill, which also connects to K5 and eventually to the Acropolis. In the late 1990s, Brigham Young University archaeologists began tunneling into O13 because a new translation of a stela found in front of O13 indicated that a cave or tunnel was under it. But the archaeologists' efforts failed because rubble in the upper portions of the pyramid constantly caved into the tunnel. Our Guatemalan helpers led us to two sides of a staircase that had ascended O13. Cool air could be felt rushing out of the small openings on both sides, especially out of the hole from the remains of Brigham Young University's tunneling attempt. The implications were clear. There had to be a tunnel system under O13, and because the air was rushing out, there had to be another opening somewhere. O13 could be connected to K5 with a tunnel, following the contours of the high hill on the backside of both of these pyramids. From K5, the tunnel system may well connect to the Acropolis and J29. The existence of these tunnels may well explain why archaeologists have only been able to date Piedras Negras to 3,000 years ago, while Cayce states that Iltar established the Hall of Records there about 12,000 years ago.
Possible that Iltar and his group came to Piedras Negras, hid the Hall of Records in an underground tunnel system, and never built any monuments, and maybe didn't leave a lot of evidence of their presence. And we're talking about something with Edgar Cayce that would go back to 10,000 BC, but it's also possible that a tunnel system at Piedras Negras was in place at 10,000 BC. Perhaps it's a natural system. Perhaps it's related somehow to that large cenote that's located not too far away from the Piedras Negras site. That makes us believe that the Acropolis and O13 are probably the best places to continue research in Piedras Negras for the Hall of Records. Both University of Pennsylvania and Brigham Young University will be the first to tell you that they've only scratched the surface at Piedras Negras. There's still a lot more to be excavated, still a lot that's unknown.
The discovery of the Bimini Road in 1968 seemed to confirm a prediction Cayce made in 1932 about part of Atlantis being found in that region in 68 and 69. The discoverer of the road site, Dr. J. Manson Valentine, asserted almost immediately that it was constructed from cut slabs of beach rock. Dmitry Rebikov, an oceanographer who worked with Valentine, believed that the road could have been a breakwater enclosing a harbor because it was similar to ancient Mediterranean breakwaters that had only been recently found. But skeptical geologists claimed that the structure off Bimini was only a natural beach rock formation. Their conclusion was based on a few coring samples taken from the road, and none of them bothered to compare the Bimini Road to the Mediterranean breakwaters. In fact, none of the geologists even mentioned that the Mediterranean breakwaters were also made from cut beach rock, or the fact that the ancient Phoenicians made tools from beach rock. In a 2003 expedition sponsored by the ARE, we discovered another formation that bears some similarity to the Bimini Road, but this time the structure was in water off Andros Island, about 100 miles to the east of Bimini. A 1,200-foot-long, three-tiered stone structure enclosing a harbor was found. The structure was vaguely similar to known ruins in Peru, but we also found an apparent tool mark along with what appeared to be paving stones on the bottom. In 2004, we returned to Andros with a crew from the National Geographic and found areas of the structure we hadn't previously seen. One of those areas appeared to have stone steps leading to the top of the third tier. We also confirmed the presence of an ancient stone structure in central Andros, which stood atop a high hill overlooking a deep water channel. While clearing the land before we arrived, a 10-foot vertical opening had been discovered by the 96-year-old owner and his grandson. The opening led to a 40-foot cave which contained ancient artifacts including conch shell horns. And then, seemingly from nowhere, Dr. Rudolf Zewestra of the University of Leiden's physics department discovered more tool marks on our video of the Andros platform. These marks, he concluded, were identical to marks found on underwater formations at Bimini, Yonaguni, and megalithic ruins in Peru. Dr. Zewestra asserts that the evidence weighs heavily on the side of the Bimini Road and the Andros platform being man-made.
The sheer fact that the underwater breakwater that has been discovered on Andros recently bears marks, tool marks, which are similar to those found on megalithic blocks, polished and cut megalithic blocks in Peru and almost certainly elsewhere, makes me now look at the Bimini Road and other similar roads, such as those off of the island of Cayce in the southern Bahamas and the nearby island of Anguilla, which I've dove myself in the past. I see these slightly differently now. It may well be that these also form some part of a maritime culture, and I think that now that we have what appears to be definitive evidence for the existence of Atlantis in the region of the Bahamas and the Caribbean, it will now be much easier, and I think that that evidence will come to light pretty quickly.
While we were traveling to Piedras Negras, I read about a small island called Cerritos, just off the coast of central Yucatan. The text stated that the island had a harbor and a 1,000-foot-long breakwater and was thought to be the main port for Chichen Itza, but no other details were provided. After we returned to the States, we obtained some of the original journal articles detailing excavations at Cerritos, and my interest was piqued by none of the articles identifying the type of stone used on the breakwater. The archaeological reports all simply stated that massive stone slabs were used. In August 2004, we went to Cerritos, accompanied by the ARE's John and Doris Van Auken. The day trip lasted over 14 hours. Cerritos is about 5 kilometers from the small fishing village of San Felipe and is a place where few tourists venture. Only one boat operator is authorized by the government to go to Cerritos, and he's only available for about 6 months of the year. The boat trip lasted about an hour each way, The boat operator didn't speak English, and Doris Van Auken served as a translator. The island was first reported in archaeological journals in 1963 and has been the focus of several intense excavations. In 1984 and 85, Cerritos was partially excavated by a team of experienced American archaeologists. They reported that it was the most unique site in the Maya world and that they had never encountered anything like it in their combined professional experience. They made 15 6-foot by 6-foot test pits, digging through 13 separate habitation layers. Carbon dating showed that the island was actively used by the Maya starting in 300 BC, but only a few areas were carbon dated. The island, no more than 650 feet in diameter, was completely covered with 29 buildings and had a stone slab seawall encircling its shoreline. Archaeologists reported that most of the huge slabs of stone that formed the breakwater had been looted for modern breakwater constructions. Incredibly, the excavations found trading artifacts on Cerritos from the Guatemalan highlands, Belize, the highlands of Mexico, Cuba, the Bahamas, and even Florida. Walking along the shore of the island, I found literally thousands of pottery shards in shallow water. In some places, the shallows are completely covered with pottery and artifacts. As I expected, the bottom foundations of the island's structures are all definitely made from coarse beach rock, which is a low-quality limestone. The looted remains of a dozen or so of the platforms that extended into the water are still there. They were all made the same way, in an unusual and unique method. Cut beach rock slabs were stuck into the bottom vertically and then placed side by side to form a rectangular enclosure. They then filled the inside area of the enclosure with smaller beach rock stones and then used large flat slabs of beach rock to make flat tops on the platforms.
You can see how the beach rock was cut and then taken and vertically jammed down into the waterbed to make the barrier here. One right after another.
Some pieces of beach rock remain in the platform and dock areas. We also saw several large mooring stones next to the platforms and docks. The island is now covered with dense vegetation, making walking and seeing the ground difficult. A hurricane that hit the area left the island in a tangled mess with trees and vegetation lying on the surface everywhere. The seawall running around the shoreline of the island is only partially intact in various places. It was about 4 feet high and encircled the whole island, creating a barrier to the waves. It's also made from slabs of beach rock stuck vertically into the ground. The breakwater forming the harbor is 1,000 feet long and a uniform 15 feet wide. It's about 120 feet from the shoreline. We filmed the entire length of the breakwater underwater. We found it was made by first sticking large slabs of beach rock vertically into the bottom, forming a 1,000-foot-long enclosure. The interior of the enclosure was then filled with smaller beach rock stones. Then, slabs of cut, flat beach rock were placed on the top, forming a breakwater that extended above the surface. It also appears to have been used as a defensive wall. Only a dozen or so of the large slabs from the breakwater top are still there, but most of them are covered with coral or vegetation. The few that are exposed definitely look like the stones from the Bimini Road and Andros platform. The largest ones we saw were perhaps 4 by 6 feet and a foot thick. There were at least 3 openings into the harbor through the breakwater. The largest opening had 2 large platforms on each side that extended well above the waterline. According to the archaeological reports, these 2 platforms had buildings erected on them, apparently guard towers or perhaps lighthouses. Archaeologists speculate that the harbor housed 300 to 400 trading canoes at a time. The implications of Cerritos are clear and irrefutable. Ancient maritime cultures in the region utilized beach rock to construct harbors, breakwaters, and cargo platforms. While we now know that beach rock was used in the region to construct harbors and breakwaters, asserting that a maritime culture was in the Caribbean and Bahamas 10 to 12,000 years ago is another thing. But on September 9, 2004, an archaeological team from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History announced a startling discovery. 3 well-preserved skeletons had been discovered in 65 feet of water in underwater caves off the Caribbean coast of Yucatan. The University of California in Riverside carbon-dated charcoal samples found with one of the skeletons to 11,000 BC. This discovery confirms that humans were in the region where the Cayce readings state that Atlanteans went just prior to the final destruction sometime around 10,500 BC. There are numerous reasons that people are interested in the search for Atlantis. One of these is what Plato described as the center city of Atlantis. The city was formed around a central hill which had temples and gardens on it. 3 interconnecting circular canals ringed the city, which was about 2 miles in diameter. A 5-mile-long main canal connected the central city waterways to the ocean. Even Andrew Collins has been skeptical that the center city described by Plato ever existed. But after a 2004 visit to North American mounds, his opinion shifted.
I'm warmed by the idea that from the Atlantis-style mounds that once existed near Portsmouth in Ohio bore the exact same design as Plato's central city. I'm warmed by the existence of that to a degree that I will now say that it is possible that we will find a series of circular canals, probably focused around a central hill or mound, that could be construed as that which is being described by Plato, yes.
The most sought-after remains of Atlantis are unique to Edgar Cayce's readings. These are the 3 Hall of Records.
Interestingly, when Cayce was in the deep trance and he was asked specifically what's in these caches, he answered that there are 32 stone tablets with hieroglyphic-like writing on them that will require some cleverness to translate. They are not like Egyptian hieroglyphs and will be easy to translate because we already know the language. There will be some work required. And on these tablets is recorded the prehistory, which is very strange the way Cayce tells it, that prior to the evolution of man through matter, there was actually an involution into matter out of energy or spirit, moving into matter. And it records all those myths that we call myths and legends are actually 4th and 5th dimensional transitions into 3-dimensional matter. And the early periods of Mu, Lemuria, Atlantis, though that history is recorded there.
At present, Egyptian authorities are having a ground-penetrating radar project done at Giza around the Sphinx and pyramids. Their eventual hope is to map all the underground tunnels and chambers present on the plateau, but how any discoveries would be announced or investigated is uncertain. According to Cayce, The Bimini Hall of Records is covered by what he called the Slime of Ages, in deep water somewhere down the Gulf Stream. The area is likely between Bimini and Andros, but finding this Hall of Records with present technology is a formidable task, if not an impossible one. The Yucatan Hall of Records, with its location most likely at Piedras Negras, may well be the first one found, and according to Cayce, the careful placement of the Yucatan Hall of Records was intended to make their eventual discovery the result of a deliberate attempt to find it.
This cache is not to be opened and found until the time moves from the early ages of man and the earth to the latter ages.
The evidence that I have is that the peoples of the Caribbean, following the cataclysm, according to various mythological tales preserved in their sacred books, did indeed found the earliest Mesoamerican cultures. All of them recalled that their gods, their ancestors, most of them referred to as feathered serpents, actually came out of the east. And the story of Wotan, the feathered serpent of the Cacatules of the area around Piedras Negras, say that he left an island which has clearly been identified as Cuba, that he travelled along the southern coast of the Gulf of Mexico and entered a large navigable river and travelled down that and founded a city which has always been taken to be Palenque, but there's indications that he or his people continued on and may well have founded Piedras Negras. And if that's so, then it does mean that Piedras Negras is, an outpost of Atlantis.
Of all the Mayan sites that have been excavated, it's one of the most remote and one of the most inaccessible, even in modern times. There's still no roadways leading to it, still no aircraft runways. The primary way to get to it is up the Usumacinta River. And that Usumacinta River is also another factor because the Usumacinta runs north into the Gulf of Mexico, eventually emptying out into the Gulf of Mexico. And if Cayce's story of Iltar and his Atlanteans bringing a Hall of Records or bringing records over to store and to preserve is correct, then they may possibly have come through the Gulf of Mexico, down and through the Usumacinta River, and settled at Piedras Negras.
Edgar Cayce, he obviously made hundreds of thousands of statements relating to the past and obviously various other matters, of course. He suggested that you should look towards the region around Bimini, 68 and 69, for Atlantis or some portion of Atlantis to rise. People began to realise that the Bahamas and obviously the Caribbean, which he also mentioned, could resolve the mystery of Atlantis. Now, he said this, and therefore he's right. That prediction is right. However you come to that, whatever the focus is there, we've now come to the conclusion that yes, Atlantis is there. So he was right all along.
The search for Edgar Cayce's 3 Hall of Records might be a lot like the quest for the Holy Grail. Jesus certainly had a final drinking cup, but many people who search for the Holy Grail believe that the search itself is more important than the cup. In Edgar Cayce's many readings on the Hall of Records, he emphasized that the motives and intentions of those who were searching for the records would have a lot to do with their discovery. Perhaps the search for the records is more important than the records themselves. In the final analysis, we're left with one large unanswered question. Is Piedras Negras the site of Cayce's 3rd Hall of Records? We did find several areas where chambers could be buried and they could conceal ancient records. But until those areas are fully excavated, What's there remains a mystery.